Amado is not somebody we should be praising. He was a thug, a killer, and a profiteer of vice and addiction. He terrorized the city of Juárez, paving the way for the murder capital it is today. Amado used his multi-billion-dollar fortune to bring endemic corruption in Mexico to unprecedented levels while making unimaginable profits for himself and his organization. So what kind of a man was Amado Carrillo Fuentes? What do we know about his personality? There's a lot we don't know about Amado's upbringing, but he seems to have entered the drug trade from a young age. His story is quite similar to many of the veterans of the Mexican drug trade. A guy from a poor peasant family in one of the many neglected parts of Sinaloa, a state where cultivating and smuggling of drugs was simply part of the history and culture of the region. To many Sinaloans, it was economically viable and justified then as much as it is now. Ever since he was a boy, Amado was said to have a knack for business, and at school he was singled out for his intelligence and memory. His uncle and old-time drug trafficker Ernesto Don Neto Fonseca Carrillo no doubt recognized his nephew's talents and put him to work in his contacts plantations. It was the logical path to success for a young man who had been denied a full education in order to support his family. Author Charles Bowden puts it quite well. For Amado, born into the business thanks to his uncle, the path is clear. He becomes typical of his drug culture, intensely patriotic, deeply distrustful of his corrupt government, absolutely enmeshed in family. Like many drug traffickers, and especially from the state of Sinaloa, where many were proud of their bandido heritage, Amado would have seen the drug trade as a business, no different than alcohol or tobacco. Traffickers were just filling a demand, after all. What's more, since it was unregulated, they would be reaping the rewards, not a corrupt elite who fattened their pockets off the labours of the poor. In their eyes, the real enemy was often the state that robbed the poor and destroyed the people's lands and livelihoods. Or, as Amado would lament later on in life, it was filthy rich businessmen who took their money and invested it elsewhere. He at least could justify organized crime by the claim his syndicate was stimulating the Mexican economy. And as his one-time lawyer, José Alfredo Andrade Bojorges, claimed, Amado had a vision to use his wealth to foster economic prosperity through investments in energy, agriculture, and education, giving Mexicans the tools to build a first world nation. No doubt Amado would have been directly affected by Operation Condor, the ruthless government crackdown on traffickers in northwestern Mexico, which saw the destruction or depopulation of 2,000 villages and hamlets in Sinaloa alone, as well as human rights atrocities against Sinaloan peasants. And Amado's pastoral roots never really seem to have left him. The legend goes that Amado left his hamlet of Guamacholito as a young boy, vowing to return as a wealthy adult. He had a house there for much of his life, a surprisingly modest one-story building on grounds without a swimming pool, which he used as a base for his operations. According to his personal treasurer, Ramon Miranda, one of Amado's most confidential meetings with Rebollo Gutierrez was there, and we can presume there were many more. We also know he regularly flew in, sometimes by jumbo jet, to visit his mother for Christmas, New Year's, and Mother's Day. To the townspeople of Guamacholito, Amado was their favorite son. Many locals were proud that their local offspring was Mexico's most important trafficker, and they relished his philanthropy in the community. As with many drug lords, Amado brought electricity, gas, and fresh water to his hometown. The local priest convinced Amado to renovate the hamlet's church, which he did, and covered its expenses down to the last centavo. He also paid for a school and a basketball court and covered the medical costs and hospital bills of various townspeople in need of urgent care. He wasn't as generous with his fortune, as far as we know, elsewhere in Mexico, or even within Sinaloa for that matter. The locals, though they might have worshipped El Señor, as he liked to call himself, perhaps didn't realize that the local donations of their local hero represented only a pittance of his overall wealth. After his death, one of the townspeople noted, quote, "He might have done a lot for his community, but look at us still. Look at the state of our houses. Even so, Amado was said to mix freely with his fellow Sinaloans. Locals would prepare his favourite dishes of pork belly stew and stuffed chili peppers, and he'd throw elaborate parties for the whole town with mariachi bands and barbecues. Even as one of the country's most powerful men, townspeople still caught him tending chickens and milking cows. Quickly too, as one villager recalls, and he'd sometimes drink the milk right from the udder. When Amado's corpse was returned to Guamachulito, the whole town mourned Amado's loss. There was an enormous funeral in which 1,200 locals were invited, plus an extra cohort of some 200 or so traffickers. They appeared in luxury cars later in the event, wearing Stetson hats and snakeskin cowboy boots. So these people, colleagues, friends, subordinates, family members, the people who saw him grow up, what did they make of the man? We don't have much by way of testimonies. Townsfolk remembered him as quiet and hard-working. Others have remembered his easy manner and sense of humour. Ramon Miranda, one of Amado's treasurers, recalls one of his boss's favourite stories. As a baby, his umbilical cord was shot off with bullets, and even as an adult, his navel still smelt of gunpowder. The tale goes that little Amado's baptism ended when a drunk Uncle Don Neto sprayed machine gun fire into the air. Amado was so petrified that his uncle ordered the band to play a corrido called The Lost Bullet to calm him down. But Amado's relaxed and easygoing manner, one which actor Jose Maria Jaspic seems to have honed in on in the Netflix series, comes through in some of the conversations and encounters that we have publicly available. Amado's first encounter with US law officials was in 1985, while working with Pablo Acosta, alias the Ojinaga Fox. On what would have been one of his many runs across the border, Amado, driving a white vehicle, was stopped by a border patrol car. Amado showed the police his DFS badge. That's the now defunct Special Services Agency, the Dirección Federal de Seguridad. The badge was a golden ticket for immunity at the time, now a symbol for state collusion with cartels. The patrol guards found an AR-15 rifle in the back of the car. They called the relevant Mexican institution to check if he had a license and took his prints while waiting for their reply. As they started talking, the guard told Amado they could potentially confiscate both the car and the gun. Amado basically said, "Fine by me, keep the gun in the car, the title deed's in the back." The licensing agency called back and told the border officer not to detain Amado. So they returned his gun, ammunition and keys, and Amado went off on his merry way. A US customs official also later detained him for carrying an automatic rifle. This would be his first and last run-in with US law enforcement. In the report, he was described as, quote, very cool and friendly, especially laid back when it came to giving out personal information. Terence Popper, on another occasion, remembered him as, quote, very friendly. Overly friendly, in fact. It might seem bizarre to hone in on these isolated conversations, but with somebody as elusive as Amado was, these are some of the only traces of the sort of man he was. Family members recall everybody being smitten with Amado for his good nature and generosity. They said he lived up to his name, Amado, meaning beloved in Spanish. One of his friends recalls his love of hosting and was surprised to see the powerful capo personally waiting on his friends, preparing coffee and heating up tortillas. It was this sort of charisma that would have made him popular with the woman in his life. Money and power would have helped along the way, but Amado was no doubt a charmer as well. Part of the reason Amado was sent off to work with Pablo Acosta at the border was due to tensions with Guadalajara co-founder Rafael Caro Quintero. Rafa was supposedly infatuated with the 17-year-old Sara Cosillo, the daughter of a powerful political family. She in turn openly flirted with Amado at every opportunity. Don Neto decided to intervene and, averting a bloodbath, sent his nephew off to Ojinaga where he could help enhance the cartel's border operation. Andres Lopez Lopez, a former Colombian trafficker who not only studied Amado but also met and worked with him, called him a family man, but of the machista variety. Perhaps this is best shown by the swarms of children he left behind, 28 by many sources, as many as 36 by Lopez's reckoning, and with who knows how many mistresses. Some of his children remember him as a fun-loving parent who spoiled them. Outside of Mexico, he was said to have a second family in Cuba, which fueled rumors that he had gone to the Caribbean to live out his life when it was suspected he'd faked his death. Amado also bore a son to a Brazilian woman called Renata Bodziak. The machista in Amado told her when they met that he intended to, quote, win over the tongue-tied 19-year-old, beginning an 8-month courtship during which she fell pregnant. He was also said to have been infatuated with Mexican pop star Gloria Trevi. It's rumored that he had an affair with her. In an alleged document in Mexico's public ministry is an account from a protected witness who stated that Amado met with Gloria in the presidential suite of the Crown Plaza Hotel in Monterrey. There, the diva queen interviewed the besotted kingpin, who later gifted her a Rolex Cellini watch encrusted with diamonds and rubies. Whether or not this story is a concoction of Mexico's infamous rumor mill, who knows? One thing's for sure though, Amado liked his luxury jewelry. He met the cliche of the rags-to-riches smuggler who splashed out on bling from the moment he started making money. He certainly enjoyed gifting jewelry. He would often buy millions of dollars worth off of Thomas Colson McGregor, a high-end jeweler and major money broker for the Juárez cartel. By Ramon Miranda's account, if Amado found out that another drug lord made an offer on some jewelry, he would offer McGregor double. And it was a matter of honor that nobody could raise it. It wasn't only his scores of mistresses and lovers whom he lavished jewelry on, but also his friends and associates too. Pablo Acosta, not exactly Amado's type, but maybe a few mustache hairs away, was the likely recipient of a 1-ounce golden ingot, as well as a solid gold Rolex, which he proudly flaunted to author and journalist Terence Popper. He was even wearing it on the day he died, after a shootout with Mexican federales. Whether the gifts were tokens of friendship or cultivation or both, Pablo certainly seemed to have been won over by the gesture. Acosta's successor, Rafael Aguilar Guajardo, also benefited from Amado's generosity, no doubt while he was alive, and most certainly when he was dead. Amado sent a hit squad to murder his superior and ally after his sicarios had rained machine gun fire on Guajardo near Cancun harbor. They apparently left a diamond ring and a gold chain on his blood-spattered corpse. According to Miranda, Amado had bought them just a few weeks earlier, intending to gift them on Guajardo's birthday. Slight change of plan then. Miranda suggests a more vulnerable side of the capo might have been at the root of his penchant for spending, especially with women at least. He recalled one particular dinner conversation when Amado let his associates in on one of his greatest complexes. He'd never considered himself a handsome man. The drug lord went on to explain when and how it took root. When he was 10, he was in love with a young girl named Isabel from his native Guamachulito. Amado wanted her as his girlfriend, but she dismissed him, telling him his ears were too big. This broke his heart, and he would never forget it. When he went to have plastic surgery for the first time, the first part of his body he was operated on was his ears. For Miranda, therefore, women were the capo's Achilles heel. He was vain, and he fell back on that one thing many complex rich people do, his wealth. And it no doubt helped smooth business and personal relationships along the way. Amado clearly had expensive tastes. He almost always wore designer suits. Amado's all-black outfit in Narcos was in fact just a creative choice. It's unknown how many houses the real Amado had. They were likely in the dozens. His Ojinaga home was a beautiful 3-story mansion on a hill boldly overlooking the United States. He also owned what was essentially a palace in a high-end district of Guadalajara. Then there's the flamboyant 1001 Knights Mansion in Hermosillo, Sonora, completely Moorish in style with Islamic domes and keyhole arches. Add this to his collection of hundreds of luxury cars, such as Lincoln Town Cars, Chevy station wagons, and Dodge pickups. But beneath the facade of a smiling, fun-loving womanizer was something much more sinister. Amado treated his work with cold, calculating seriousness. I suppose when your life or work is at stake, it's what you'd expect from a trafficker. Death, to put it crassly, in a system without law courts or prisons, is an unavoidable part of the game. But Amado had certain sociopathic traits in the ways he conducted his business, traits which went beyond the norm. In 1986, US informants were able to get a meeting with Pablo Acosta and Amado. In that meeting, they noted a tension. between the two strugglers. After they'd met up for breakfast, they overheard a heated conversation between Pablo and Amado. The two had discovered that the DEA was on their tracks, and that the agents knew the location of an underground storage tank somewhere in the desert where cocaine was being stashed. They'd smelt a rat. Without Pablo's knowledge, Amado took matters into his own hands to rectify a potential security leak. He'd captured 6 people connected to the stash site and had them interrogated, tortured, and murdered. In spite of this purge, though, based on the thoroughness, that is, the cruelty of the interrogations, Amado was confident that none of the captured men had talked. Even Acosta, never one to shy away from murder, considered Amado's ruthlessness out of line. "What have you done?" he said. "You've killed 6 people, and what have you accomplished by it?" Amado's reply, overheard by one of the informants, neither of whom the traffickers had even suspected, were the chilling words, "It is better for 6 innocent men to die than for 1 guilty man to go unpunished." And this is the other side of Amado, the side that terrorized a city, that forced border officials into corruption out of fear for their lives. As one journalist wrote, it has become a matter of grim predictability in Juárez. Whenever a major seizure of Carrillo's drugs takes place on the American side, there is hell to pay. In these situations, he ordered the assassination of anyone involved in the shipment who could have snitched, just like the 6 sicarios involved in the Ojinaga cocaine stash. He rarely considered the possibility that law enforcement could have seized the drugs without a snitch on the inside. Even if he did, at least killing his employees would send a message, "Don't mess up, or you'll pay with your life." Such was the little regard he had for human life. According to the late Charles Bowden, between 1993 and 1994, Amado started leaving his murdered victims in public places, wrapped with yellow ribbons as warnings to his enemies, both inside and outside the cartel. Later, Amado would drape his victims with cheap tapestries featuring tigers on them as his signature trademark. The capo, after all, was the only person in Ciudad Juárez who owned a tiger. The tiger even escaped its cage in 1996 and was found prowling the streets of Juárez. Privately, insider reports suggest Amado was unhinged. He was the sort of mafia boss who could be laughing with you over a drink one moment and the next putting a bullet in your skull. One informant was being interrogated about the murder of Bruno Jordan, the brother of DEA agent Phil Jordan. Here's what he had to say about Amado.
"Jordan, okay, you want to know, it's simple. Amado Carrillo, Bruno was fucking this woman, or spoke to this woman, or looked at this woman. How does it matter? It was Carrillo's woman. That's all that matters. Amado, he's doing so much shit. All this coke. He is crazy. If he was sitting here drinking, I'd kill him before he killed me. He's crazy. He shoots everyone. So he has Bruno cocked."
In this vein, it's also rumoured that in his first marriage in 80 or 81, he murdered one of his guests, a family member, over something that upset him. We don't know what. But now, let's turn to the sort of traits Amado would have had to build the drug empire he did. For a brute though he might have been, this was no simpleton. First is clearly cutthroat ambition. You don't get to where Amado was by being the nice guy. Just look at his career path. After years of invaluable lessons on drug smuggling in Ojinaga, Amado had his mentor, partner, and clearly his good friend Acosta murdered. Then he took over the smuggling routes and networks he had cultivated for nearly 2 decades. He had his closest Colombian contact, Ochoa Soto, butchered, then stole his cocaine. Amado's superior, Aguilar, was mown down in Cancun after threatening to reveal the names of key players in the Plaza system. The capo played the major Colombian cartels against each other, allying himself with whichever cartel was strongest at a given moment. Outliving the Medellin and the Cali cartels, Amado reaped the rewards and ramped up shipments. Again and again, the fall of one trafficker or organization was Amado's gain. And for him, the only way was up. 2, he was extremely clever. Amado, quite simply, must have been both a logistical whiz and a formidable diplomat to navigate and balance out all the interests and shareholders in his confederation. One might say anybody moving as much coke as Amado was moving was the biggest factor for his success, and the human element is virtually extraneous. Money talks, and cocaine money especially talks. He was raking in billions of dollars every year. Politicians, military generals, and law enforcers all wanted in. But Think of the person who spent nearly 2 decades moving up the ladder, the people he cultivated, the networks he built and expanded, the business strategies he consolidated. Traffickers like Amado are one in a million, and the evidence of this is in the facts of his reign. He must have been a smooth talker with outstanding people skills, a natural leader and mediator who diffused tensions and pacified internal rivalries. And for everyone who hasn't watched the bio, don't forget that Amado, on top of spearheading the Juárez cartel, dominated the Mexican cocaine trade. He created partnerships with drug traffickers all over the country, bringing them under the fold of his protection networks. He created another Guadalajara-style confederation, just like his predecessor Felix Gallardo. Traffickers shared routes, suppliers, intel, technology, transportation, and manpower. Insisting on regular dialogue and conflict resolution, Amado presided over a relatively harmonious system, especially compared with the state of Mexican cartels today. Part of the success of the Juárez cartel owed to its adoption of state-of-the-art technology, with the Cali cartel as its model. Its traffickers were some of the first to use mobile phones when they became available in Mexico. They adopted beepers, fax machines, and developed encryption, as well as sophisticated scanners to pirate frequencies and go undetected. The Juárez cartel employed tech wizards, some of them American, to keep the capo at the cutting edge. Having Mexico's #1 surveillance radar official on his payroll probably helped as well. To ensure maximum secrecy in his operations, Amado compartmentalized his organization into small units of men. Nobody inside one unit knew anyone or anything about the other units. That way, if one got taken down, its members couldn't tell on other smugglers outside their own cell. A DEA official investigating Amado in the 90s said, Amado is careful, he's meticulous, and he's learned that when it comes to dealing with the other cartels, working together is better than killing each other. We believe he also maintains the best contacts of all the Mexican cartels with their Colombian suppliers. The Colombians like his style. They like things quiet. Amado's personal financial secretary, Ramon Miranda, said this: Amado Carrillo was something else. He thought things twice over before doing them. I never saw him make a single hasty decision. He was always analyzing options and evaluating their consequences. On this note, his former lawyer, José Alfredo Andrade Borges, described him as skeptical and distrusting, a man who rarely listened to other people's advice, and in the lawyer's own words, who believed only in God and in himself. There's also a little anecdote brought down to us from journalist Terence Popper, who met with Amado and Pablo Acosta not too long before Pablo was hunted down. Looking back on his impressions of Amado, Popper remembers a self-assured, suspiciously charming man with a glint in his eye. It was as if he knew Popper shouldn't have been there, as if he knew Acosta shouldn't have been meeting with US journalists. And he was right. Acosta told another US journalist later on about bribing and collaborating with the Mexican police and military. He became an embarrassment and a liability, not only to Amado. Pablo was later shot down by federal police forces. Amado, the operation's chief sponsor, filled the vacuum, along with former Special Intelligence Chief Rafael Aguilar Guajardo. Amado learned from Pablo Acosta's failures. And in turn, he learned from Felix Gallardo's successes. If you want drug protection from the government, you pay up, you keep your mouth shut, and you stick to the shadows. Do that and the sky's the limit. Keep a high profile, make yourself a target, or expose your operations. Bad things happen. Cowboys and snitches don't get riches, they get the bullet or a prison cell. We've seen how Amado dealt with sicarios who lost a shipment or compromised his security network. We've seen his treatment of noisy and brazen associates like Acosta and Aguilar, but Amado dealt with Joaquin El Chapo Guzman another way. After the disintegration of the Guadalajara cartel in 1989, El Chapo joined the Carrillo Fuentes organization, but he quickly became a liability for Amado. According to Anabel Hernandez, El Chapo's penchant for rowdy parties, violence, drugs, and alcohol put him at odds with the cartel boss. Amado sent him to work with El Güero Palma in Nayarit State, but El Chapo ignored the order. In May 1993, in the parking lot of Guadalajara International Airport, Cardinal Posadas Ocampo was murdered in his car. Official reports concluded the Cardinal was mistaken for El Chapo during a gunfight between members of the Sinaloa and the Tijuana cartels. Later evidence, though, suggested the killings were carried out by a third group of criminals. According to Hernandez, though, law enforcement needed a scapegoat. The erratic and bloodthirsty El Chapo fit the bill. Corrupt prosecutor Coelho Trejo called Amado and asked him to give him up. Amado, acting in the interest of his organization, obliged, and El Chapo was arrested and jailed shortly thereafter. Such was the value Amado placed on anonymity. Anonymity at all costs, including the freedom of his friend and lieutenant. And after all, who can blame him? This man dedicated his life to his career. With so many plastic surgeries, he practically changed his own identity for it. Imagine having an ego as big as a mafia boss's, with people barely knowing what you look like. Few photographs were ever taken of him. The hit squad sent to kill him in 1993 shot an innocent man, most likely because they thought he was Amado. He was usually surrounded by at least a dozen bodyguards, with a team sent ahead of him, keeping his security team alert to any threats. He had dozens of fake passports, hundreds of vehicles, at least one body double, and even built underground tunnels beneath his homes. Yes, Amado was exceptionally crafty, and he had gadgets and upgrades like you can't even imagine. His Dodge Ram pickup truck was decked out with armored plating and bulletproof rubber tires. At the flick of a switch on the dashboard, the cab immediately filled up with smoke. It could leak pools of oil to make any vehicle on its tail skid off the road, and even deploy a canister filled with shrapnel. In the months before his death, Amado was being driven around in an ambulance, but its interior was padded out with the sorts of luxuries you'd expect from a limousine. At the end of the day, the man operated as a criminal businessman. Creative, resourceful, adaptable. These were just some of his strengths. But a striking aspect of Amado is just his sheer boldness. Let's remind ourselves of just two of his gutsiest endeavors. One, flying jumbo jets into Mexico with the help of Mexico's head of surveillance radar, federal police agents to offload the merchandise and clear the airstrip. 2. Helping his military crony, General Gutierrez Rebollo, become drug czar so that he could A. eliminate Amado's enemies and secure his hegemony, B. share crucial intel from the DEA and official Mexican agencies in order to avoid capture. Amado's story is just beyond belief. Beneath it all, though, was a man who, unfortunately, considering his trade, had singular skill, patience, and ambition. While building his empire, he seems to have played the right hand nearly every time. He always looked for opportunities to expand his power. He always struck when the iron was hot, however ruthless the means. And there's no denying he had some luck along the way. Equally, with his devotion to anonymity, there's no denying he often created it. Whatever his real motivations were, we'll never know for sure. For all his talk of investing in Mexico, there's little evidence he seriously committed to development strategies. Mainly, his organization paved the way for the murder capital Juárez is today. He brought death, terror, and billions of dollars worth of dirty money. Money from vice and addiction, money which with every shipment piled on another layer of rot in what was to a large degree a mafia state. Amado overextended himself. His power ran too high, too deep, and too far to cover up. And with Uncle Sam knocking down doors, he was completely at the mercy of state officials. It's a good reminder that traffickers operating in mafia states, particularly 20th century Mexico, are often pawns in a much bigger power play. Amado seemed to be the candidate to wreck that trend. The sheer volume of cocaine he was moving brought his power to another level. It is precisely for this reason that so many remain convinced Amado faked his death and made a mockery of the state he had always so deeply distrusted.